Today, I'm going to show you guys how to do some more advanced drifting entries in GTA 5. So this video is dedicated to showing you guys how to perform some more fun and advanced drifting entries. First, we're going to recap some main drifting skills and controls that you'll be using, and then we'll move into specific instructions for reverse entries, 360-degree entries, and jump drifts. Now, even though I will be providing a brief overview of the main skills we'll be using, keep in mind that these are more advanced techniques, and if you aren't familiar with the basics of GTA 5 drifting, then it's definitely worth practicing those before trying any of this out. Feel free to check out my in-depth 3-part drifting tutorial if anything in this guide doesn't make sense to you, or if you want a more full understanding of drifting in GTA 5. With all that covered, let's get started. Alright boys, so before we head to the track, let's quickly cover some main controls and tactics we'll be using in this guide. First off, we've got our left pointer finger over the left trigger for the brakes here. For high angle drifts and reverse entries, pressing and holding the brakes will help us pull some angle out of our drift and prevent our car from spinning out, and this will also help us preserve some momentum in 360-degree drifts. Next up, for the controller, we've got our left thumb on the left stick here to counter steer and steer as necessary so we can enter drifts and keep our car sideways through a line. Next, we have our right thumb on the right stick to help us reposition the camera while we're drifting. As you guys will see in the controller camera gameplay, I'll pull back on the right stick slightly and aim it in the direction of my drift to help plan out my lines and get better proximity to obstacles. Next up, we've got our right pointer finger over the right bumper for the handbrake. We will utilize this quite a lot to control our car's power, to engage the mid-drive speed boost, to lock the rear wheels and get our car rotating quickly, and also to help keep our revs up while extending a drift. And finally, we have our right middle finger over the right trigger for the throttle. Obviously, we'll typically keep this floored to ensure that we're using as much of the car's power as possible, but we also can modulate it a bit to help control our car's angle and prevent it from spinning out. So now that we've covered some of the basics here, let's head right to the track. Now, moving into reverse entries, as it turns out, one of the main factors behind successfully pulling off one is the use of the brakes that I hinted at just before. We now know that they're a really good backup to use in the event of extreme oversteer or when we really need to slow our car down, but now we're going to rely on them a bit more to keep our car controlled when it's sliding backwards into a corner. Now, before I explain how to do a reverse entry, I will mention this. There is a fundamental problem with GTA 5's car physics model that limits the amount of steering angle or has some effect on the car's weight transfer and right-hand turns. I'm not really sure what the specific issue is here, but nonetheless, it prevents us drifters from being able to consistently pull off right-handed reverse entries. Occasionally we'll get lucky, but I think the best way for you to practice reverse entries and more advanced high-angle drifts is to try them in left-handed turns. So with that in mind, we're going to approach a simple left-hand turn at a very high rate of speed, a bit quicker than we've done in the previous drills. We're going to try to get towards the top of third gear or so that way we have enough momentum to successfully follow all the way through with the reverse entry. From here, we're going to perform an extremely aggressive entry, more aggressive than we've ever done before, almost like you're trying to force the car to spin out. I personally like to use the Scandinavian flick entry to perform these reverse entries, as they allow me to maintain a lot of speed, which, as I said, is extremely important for following all the way through with this tactic. Anyways, once we perform the entry of our choice, we're going to stay on the power, and just at the point that the car is around a 90-degree angle with the road that we're on, we're going to slam down on those brakes as if we're going to start to do a rolling burnout. And obviously, while we're doing this, we're going to steer all the way to the right to prevent our car from fully spinning out and also guiding it towards the exit of the turn. Now, if you've timed it correctly, you will notice that pressing the brakes and the throttle at the same time while the car is at such a high angle will actually start to pull the car back straight and will prevent you from totally spinning out. As you hold down the brakes and you progressively start to pull some angle out from your initial entry, take note for when the car is pointed towards the exit of the corner or is pointed along the line you're trying to follow. And once you reach that point, you're going to let go of the brakes, and while still staying on the power, continue drifting through the remainder of that corner, letting off the gas and re-engaging that mid-drive speed boost as you need to. Now, this is an extremely complicated technique and will take some time for you to practice, but the general principle of holding down the brakes while staying on the power should be fairly easy to learn. Really, it's just a matter of practicing this kind of entry at various speeds, because this can really make or break the rest of the line. If you enter too slowly into a reverse entry drift, using the brakes to pull angle out will slow the car down too much and kill the drift entirely. On the other hand, if you enter a drift at way too high of a speed, the car can be super unpredictable and hard to gauge that point where you'll need to start holding down the brakes. This leads into another key point, which is actually how deep in the corner you'll need to enter. Typically, if your car doesn't have a lot of grip, it's best to start a reverse entry a bit earlier in the corner, since it'll take more time for the brakes to start to stabilize the car and you'll slide a lot longer at a higher speed. Now, if your car has a bit more grip, you can start a reverse entry a bit later in the corner and you'll hold the brakes down for a slightly shorter duration to get the car set up to carry out the rest of that drift. Additionally, if you let go of the brakes and your car still looks like it's going to spin out, you can briefly get back on the brakes and hold them down for a little longer so you can pull out enough angle so that way you're set to continue the drift cleanly. Once again, for reverse entries, you can also make use of the handbrake during the entry to kick the car down a gear so it's at a high enough RPM, which will make exiting the corner sideways a bit easier. Quickly tapping the handbrake throughout the entry will actually allow the car to build some revs, so it'll be that much easier to get back in the groove with the mid-drive speed boost after you exit the turn. And the last really great way that you can practice reverse entries is to play around with how aggressive your initial entry is, and also with the point where you start to slam down on those brakes. With enough speed and with the right car, you can aggressively enter a drift and hold down the brakes when the car is almost completely backwards, and the car will still somehow be able to straighten itself out and continue with a proper drift. Here's a great example of that from my past drifting masterclass livestream, where I'm using the Futo GTX for this.
It's way easier. Oh, dude, I'm like fully... Sheesh. Damn, boys, y'all see that? Oh my god.
Now, moving into 360-degree entries, these are also super fun, but like with reverse entries, they will take a lot of practice. To get started, we're going to go into a left-handed turn at a decent speed, not too fast, not too slow, and we're going to aggressively initiate a drift with something like a Scandinavian flick so we can get the car rotating very quickly. We're going to allow the car to go almost completely backwards while still turning left in the direction of that initial entry, and once the car is backwards, we're going to catch it and start steering directly to the right to allow the car to complete that full 360-degree rotation. Once the car is spun back around and is relatively straight, we'll again start steering to the left to keep the car in that leftwards drift and get back on the power to continue the rest of our line as normal. Now, luckily with this kind of entry, you do have a little bit more freedom with the speed of your entry, so you can always start it slower to begin with and then get comfortable with the quick motion of entering, catching the car when it's completely backwards, steering in the opposite direction of that initial drift, and then steering back into the direction of the drift when you spin the car back around. Then obviously when you get more comfortable, you can approach these entries with a bit more speed. Once again, the handbrake is another really valuable tool that can help you get the car rotating quickly for this type of entry. If you tap the handbrake right as you initiate the drift, it'll lock the wheels, and while undergoing such an aggressive weight transfer, this will help the car spin through that first 180 degrees a lot quicker, which will help the drift look a little bit more smooth and fluid. Additionally, the normal brakes can also be helpful to keep your entry speed up, as when your car is fully backwards, you can actually quickly press the brakes to get the car into reverse, which will actually give you a little bit more momentum so you can complete the second half of the spin. Using the brakes will also keep you at a really good speed, so that way you can easily get back on the power once you spin the car back around fully. And that's really about all there is to cover with 360-degree drifts. So again, practice using the tips that I just covered, and you should be well on your way to consistently repeating them. And the last type of entry we're going to cover here is a jump drift entry, which is actually a lot simpler than you'd think. So long as you've gotten a good hold of entries already and you know how to use the normal brakes and the handbrake to your advantage, this shouldn't be really that bad. This time around, we're going to approach a slight incline so we can get our car set up to do a small jump at a decent rate of speed. Then, slightly before the jump itself, we're going to flick the car as if we're doing an entry to offset the car and get it sliding in the direction that we want to. In this case, I'm going to do a little leftward Scandinavian flick so I can get the car drifting in that direction as I go off the jump. We're going to go off the jump, and once all four wheels have left the ground, we're going to hold the handbrake and turn the left stick in the direction of the drift to guide our car in the air. We're going to try to keep our car relatively level so it lands smoothly and doesn't get damaged, and when we land, we're going to let off the handbrake and then countersteer and control our power as necessary to keep the car sideways. If you land with a little bit too much angle, you can also use the normal brakes to reel the car back in and continue the drift as normal. Now this will require some practice on your part to get familiar with how aggressively you can enter the drift before you hit the jump and how much speed you'll need to carry when you go off the jump. Depending on how big your landing area is, you can enter with more or less speed, and you can begin the entry a bit further away from or a bit closer to the ramp so that way you land in the perfect spot. Additionally, for bigger jump drifts, you don't actually need to enter the jump sideways, and you can actually get the car in the direction that you want to drift in just by spinning the car in that direction using the left stick while the car's in midair. Really, this shouldn't be all that hard to gauge, and as long as you utilize the methods that I just discussed for higher angle drifts, you should have no issues keeping the drift going after you land. And once you master that smaller jump drift like the one that I have set up on my practice map, you can explore around the map to find others and give them a shot for yourselves, and soon enough you'll probably be able to hold a crazy enough jump drift like this one. So that's really about all there is to jump drifts. Luckily, they're not as hard as the entries that I covered before, but they're just as fun and rewarding. And that will conclude my guide covering how to do some more advanced drifting entries in GTA 5. Hopefully this guide helped you guys out. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments. With all that said, thank you guys so much for watching and supporting my channel, and have an amazing day.